Yeah, I did. I thought January 6th was a clown show.
Yeah.
I thought that anyone who thinks that the Republic was in serious danger on January 6th, you had a control room with Rudy Giuliani and Bannon and those people. The country couldn't have been safer. I mean, the whole thing.
But they got the podium, Bill. Former Attorney General Bill Barr tells us what we already knew, that January 6th was both a joke and a clown show. There never was an insurrection, and the country was never at risk. This is Bill Barr explaining the obvious.
Do you see a way out or a way to rebuild trust in institutions?
I have been, up until recently, I've been sort of optimistic because I felt that the big dynamic in our country over the last 30 or 40 years has been the move of the Democratic Party sharply to the left. And that's not me talking as a partisan. I mean, every empirical study has showed that's the case. And they've left a lot of people behind them, and they're kowtowing more and more to a more radical group in the party. That is really the dynamic, and that's part of the dynamic that brought Trump to power. Frustration with that and frustration with the so-called elites who were not resisting it, but going along with it. So I have felt for some time that this was could be a replay of 1980. When one party goes too far in one direction, it leaves a big spectrum for the other party to fill. And I feel the way for the country back was for the Republican Party to get the hint and put up somebody who's quasi-normal to be president of the United States.
So that's a Trump day,
And I think that would lead to a resounding victory, and with enough strength in Congress to reject the extremism on one side and show that there's an alternative other than extremism on the other side.
Do you see the extremism on the other side, on the Republican side, as being an issue as well?
Yeah, no, I personally feel it's more reactive. In this sense, the threat to American democracy is not authoritarian black shirts coming from the right. It's not that kind of threat. The threat of totalitarianism is, as Tocqueville wrote in the 1830s, which is it's more of the progressive totalitarianism that a lot of liberals, classical liberals, are now talking about, whether it's Barry Weiss or Andrew and people like that. That it is totalitarian. I mean, who are the people losing their jobs these days? Is it people on the left? No. I mean, there's more McCarthyism going on in this country than happened during McCarthy's day, and by a big factor.
Let's pause here for a minute and take a look at Alexis de Tocqueville, this scholar, philosopher, political scientist who wrote back in the 1830s about America. You see from Wikipedia, best known for his works called Democracy in America. In both, he analyzed the living standards and the social conditions. Democracy in America was published after Tocqueville's travels in the United States, today considered an early work of political science. And so the book, Democracy in America, has a lot in it. The primary focus of the book is an analysis of Republican representative democracy, and in it, Tocqueville speculates on the future of democracy in the United States, discussing possible threats to democracy and possible dangers of democracy. These include his belief that democracy has a tendency to generate into soft despotism, as well as the risk of developing a tyranny of the majority. The people in the majority just vote themselves a raise at the expense of everybody else. He observes that the strong role religion played in the United States was due to the separation from the government, a separation all parties found agreeable. But now you see factions trying to make the government into a religion in and of itself. The state and the worship of the state and their all-knowing, all-touching power, unifying around bureaucratic endeavors to stop global warming and to create equity across society. Believe in the government, believe in the structure rather than your own religion. Unite the two. He contrasts that to other parts of the world. Tocqueville observed that social mechanisms have paradoxes, as in what later became known as the Tocqueville effect, saying that social frustration increases as social conditions improve. Once people get more comfortable, they have other things to complain about. They're not complaining about food and water and living conditions and healthcare. They're now complaining about pronouns. He wrote that this growing hatred of social privilege as social conditions improve leads to state concentrating more power to itself. His views on the U.S. took a darker turn after 1840, and he talked about it in later writings. So as we can see, we are experiencing this soft despotism where we don't have a dictator who is censoring people openly and saying, you get into party line, or openly prosecuting their political opponents as political opponents. We have instead it being outsourced to the private tech companies, FBI communicating with Twitter, pre-Elon. We have not Joe Biden's Justice Department prosecuting his political opponent, Donald Trump, yet, but we have state prosecutors prosecuting Trump. And we have insurrectionists who are being prosecuted as ultra MAGA extremists for engaging in political protest. It's not open, outright despotism, it's soft despotism. And it is not necessarily antithetical to democracy because the people are voting for it. The people in New York are going to be thrilled to elect prosecutors and attorney generals who are going to prosecute their political enemies. It's majority rules, and so it's democracy, but it is despotic. And that is the downside of democracy. And this is something that a lot of the political theorists have been concerned about for quite some time. So that is what Barr is referencing when he explains what's happening. Now, meanwhile, all of the Democrats and lefties and Liz Cheney and Kinzinger's out there will hyperventilate about a brief riot and protest as though that's going to be the end of America, not the other changes that are happening structurally throughout America that wreck the foundations of democracy.
Factor. In those days, it was, people in Hollywood who had attended meetings of the Communist Party. And now if you're a kindergarten teacher, head of a university, whatever, you can lose your job. That's the kind of creeping totalitarianism and controlling what people think that I think is the danger to freedom in this country. I think the people on the right are not actually the threat to the democratic system.
No.
I feel compelled to ask you, though, did you feel that way on January 6th?
Yeah, I did. I thought January 6th was a clown show.
Yes.
I thought that anyone who thinks that the Republic was in serious danger on January 6th, you had a control room with Rudy Giuliani and Bannon and those people. The country couldn't have been safer. I mean, the whole thing.
But they got the podium, Bill. They got their hands on that podium.
The country, I mean, this was a Keystone Cops operation that played into the hands of their adversaries. And people say, well, why were they treated differently than the people in Portland? No one feels that more keenly than I,
Fell
because
right into their
we were
hands.
trying to deal with people in Portland. But, and they should. That was, an attack on an American institution. But they all dressed the same, dressed in black, wore masks, came out at night with no distinguishing features, very hard to build a case. Only people on the right would go walking into the most photographed place in the country, all wearing distinctive clothing and no face masks.
With no guns.
I mean, the thing was a joke. And I would point out,
It was.
no agency in the even in the executive branch went along with this. No state went along with it. No Republican governor, no Republican legislature, no attorney general, deputy attorney general, my successors, no lawyers in the other agencies. It was a farce, like most things that Trump cooks up on his own.
So they turned it into something that it wasn't, that it never was going to be. It was something that happened and that turned into a riot, and they escalated it into this theory that it was this massive conspiratorial insurrection to literally seize power in the country. Never made any sense. Instead, it's being exploited and used against political enemies of the Democratic Party in this country, which is the much bigger threat to America than anything that happened on January 6th, or than anything that was allegedly being cooked up by the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers. They will be scapegoated. They'll be used as symbolic, scary dolls that they can hold up in front of the cameras, in front of the American people for the next several elections to say, this is what is coming for you if you don't vote for us. And we know how people respond to fear, and we'll see if it continues to work for them. But Bill Barr, I think, is exactly right. Concept of an insurrection is a joke, and it is a clown show. And the more and more that we learn about it, the more evidence that gets revealed about how this whole thing went down, I think the more that the world will realize he's right.